Father, I thank you for the Lord's Day. Father, I always want to be mindful of the day of the week that we set aside to worship you. And Father, we have lifted up our voices. We have praised you in the worship with the worship team here, Father. And we pray that everything that we say and do will just lift you up on the pedestal, Father, that you deserve. We thank you for the answered prayers. We thank you for those many things in our lives, Father, where we can see your hand in it. Father, I pray that anything that I say or do will be truthful to your word today. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen. About a week ago, I ran into Randall and talked to him, and he said, Dennis, we need a newsletter from you. We need to know what's going on in the jail. Nashville Community Church has been extremely faithful since I've been chaplain there, supporting the ministry. As Teresa will tell you, as anybody that knows me very well, I'm not very good about keeping people in touch with things. So I told Randall, I said, hey, what a lot of churches do is just have me come in and give an update. He said, what are you doing the 21st? So he gave me the whole sermon. So he's up taking grandkids back, I guess, meeting someone, and then maybe getting some time off too. But if you've been involved in ministry work at all, some time away from things usually helps, doesn't it? We took a 2-week vacation. First time I've been away from the jail for that long, and it was much needed. Very much needed. I come to you today, and I've got a sermon I want to start with you, but if we can show that first slide, I'd like to give you an update on the family. A key to taking a good picture is surround yourself with good-looking people. I dare say nobody's going to be focused on me. They're going to be looking at everybody else in that picture. June 1st, 2023, our youngest son, Brad, married Jessica. His co-teacher, she's a special ed teacher at a grade school in Fort Collins. Bradley left Bayfield. He graduated in 2008, went on and pursued his graduate degree, got a psychology degree, and he's teaching right now at a high school, or as a psychologist at a high school in Fort Collins. Jessica is in the special needs program working with kids there, and they loop them. She will start off with first graders, I think, is the earliest, and then loop them through most of their elementary school. So she really builds a relationship with them. You guys probably know Joe and Dasha a lot better than Brad and Jess, but we're so proud of what both of our boys are doing. Joe and Dasha are on the far end of the screen. You guys pretty much know the story where Joe went to CSU also, got a communications major, came back, and he really didn't have anything lined up. And the pastor at First Baptist Bayfield, Randy, cornered him and said, hey, come in, it'll be a bridge maybe, but be our youth director. So Joe came back. I don't think he really thought anything along those lines, but prayed about it, and God opened up those doors, and he was our youth director a couple of years? 5 years? Wow. He had a special student there. He's in the sound booth right now. Mr. Nicholas was still in high school. How many of you know the connection between Joe and Nicholas? Raise your hand. If you don't know, I'm going to have Nicholas fill you in on it, okay? They share similar scars, and there's a line that I like to use. I get a read on the audience, but we have a long ways to go and a short time to get there. Do you guys know what movie that's from? Smokey and the Bandit, Burt Reynolds, Sally Field. You guys, I wish I hadn't seen that movie because that's all I think about when I'm preaching. I got a whole lot of material and I don't have much time to get through it. But I ought to upgrade my movies, I think, a little bit. But anyway, it's a neat story. Nicholas, we didn't recognize you very well before that surgery and afterwards. It was amazing to see what God's done in your life, and even in Joe's life. Joe and Dasha came over for the wedding. It was still their school year in Kyiv, and as parents, I can see it. I'm sure Teresa can too, but if you really hone in on his eyes, you'll see that he's really starved of sleep. There's about a 9, depending upon daylight savings times, either an 8-hour or a 9-hour time zone difference between Colorado time and Kyiv, Ukraine time. And he was Zoom teaching his class. They couldn't find anybody to teach. So he'd get up, he'd go to bed and get a little bit of sleep, get up and spend most of the night Zoom teaching. Then on June 1st, he's there at the wedding. He did that for that entire time they were in the States. Just shows you the heart of a lot of our young people, that he would do that. He's committed to helping those kids. I got to say, I need to point out Teresa here too. We had a vice president way back when, Dick Cheney, and I think it was something he said once that his wife Liz told him a story. He said, if I would have married anybody else, they'd be president right now. He was vice president. He didn't get to the presidency, but he's getting nicked because he didn't take it all the way to the presidency. Anything that I say and do from the pulpit or in the jail ministry is supported so heavily through her prayers and through her support. If you know that, I'm going to take a beating when I get out of here for singling her out, but it's appreciated to have a wife that is so committed to the ministry we have here. Let me give you a little bit update on the jail. I was telling somebody earlier that we're up to Friday when I was in there, the population, the jail attendance is 211 inmates. We dropped down to about as low as 120, and the highest I've ever seen it is 240, and that's kind of max capacity. They're using all the cells in the old jail and everything under those conditions. But the situation in La Plata County, and I think even nationwide, is there's more and more detentions all the time. And even now, there's a lot of inmates that are released. When they don't have a place to put them, they've got to do something. So a lot of work releases or whatever. But the jail ministry is going well. We have a number of volunteers, even out of this church. Randall has been consistent. I think, band leader is going in with one of the guys in the music team is going in every week. Is he here today? Was it Bo or Guy? I'm sorry.
I'm here. I go in with Randall.
Yeah, you go in on Thursdays, right? Yeah, you help in a Bible study. We put in the bulletin, and it's been announced, but we're in need of volunteers. And I tell people the best way to know if that's something that's a fit, just come in for a visit. Coordinate with me. I've given you my cell number and my email address. If you're interested at all, if you feel that inkling, just let's get you in jail and see what it's like. And we break you in according to what your gifts are, what the need is. But what I like to do, if somebody's in question, get them in, see if it works. They taught us to do one thing. When you come through that area at the first of the jail, you come through the double doors. When you hear that big metal door shut behind you, look at their eyes, see what you see. And some people, wow, they are now just one of the incarcerated. They're a captive to that jail till somebody opens that door for them and lets them out. Some people that affects, some people it doesn't. But you'll get a read right off the bat. If there's any inkling after that first visit, we try to probably say, hey, help in the library. The librarians are always in need of help. There's no real direct contact with the inmates that way. They go through all the requests for books. We have it keeps changing, I think close to a 5,000 volume library that the chaplain, after Randall, I think, started. And it's just grown, and it's one of the things the inmates can do is has access to a lot of reading. Once they get those requests filled, they go around a cart, they open up the tray door, they call out that inmate's name, they come up to the tray door and they hand them a book or the books. What the deputies and the people at the jail like is our librarians are tough. The guy come up there and said, you put in a request, but you still got 2 books outstanding. Until we get these back, you're not getting this book. And they want that discipline in their lives. So if you're interested in that, give me a yell. The other thing I want to point out on the jail ministry, it's a conversion story. We have those with all the volunteers, but the one I want to focus with, and I have this inmate's permission to talk about it, I actually have a video of him giving his testimony one evening in a Bible study that Gordy and Bill and I are involved in. And Lewis gave this testimony, and it was pretty profound, because we'd seen the change in him. We'd seen when he'd accepted Christ, but he started going through the specifics of it. He was into drugs heavily. He was a dealer. And you can tell a lot by an inmate just by the tattoo picture. Lewis has a whole bunch of facial tattoos. Tattoos, when you first see him, it'll kind of scare you. It's frightening. And there's a story behind all that. I know the jail deputies are taught the different gangs that are presented by the different tattoos, and you avoid mixing gangs and problems. I've been in the hallway when they'd be transporting inmates, and the inmates are sizing each other, and if they see the wrong tattoo, you can just see the tension building. But anyway, with Lewis, after he accepted Christ, I've talked to Bill and Gordy about it, all of a sudden those tattoos have disappeared. I see a brother in Christ. I see someone that's accepted Christ. I don't see the evil component of it anymore. In his testimony, he tells a story that before he was arrested this last time, he served multiple times in jails and in prisons. But he said, I was going to waste somebody. You know what that means? His girlfriend had a pistol, his pistol in her purse. And he said it was a drug deal that was bad. It went bad. He wasn't being paid for it. And if the situation was right, the safest way to do that was to be able to get the gun from her and blow him away. He was going to erase it. And he said everything went together like he thought it was going to. And when he got his girlfriend's purse and reached into it, it wasn't there. He said that's the first he saw that something was bigger than him. He said after he talked to her, he says, I don't know, I just forgot to bring it. He gets arrested over something else, and he says, the way he tells his story, he said it's almost like God had picked me, and no matter what I had, it kept coming back to him. And in a cell block one night, he was heard, he's in the holding tanks, he's still high on drugs, and he hears a distinct voice where saying, get up off your feet. You need to do something. And he's looking for anybody in there. There's other people in that cell, but it's not them talking. It's not a deputy. And he said to this day, he knows Christ was calling him. And he says, in his still foul language, he says, I'm wasted. I can't stand right now. I'm high on stuff. He says, get up, stand up. And he stood up and was able to do what Jesus was telling him to do. And since then, he's made just an amazing transformation. He led a Bible study one night for us. He went on to prison here a couple of weeks ago. We haven't found out exactly where he's landed yet. But even the judicial system is seeing the change in Lewis, and they're seeing what he's going through. And when I first had him on a one-on-one meeting, he said, Dennis, I don't think I'm ever going to see daylight. He said, I'm in for life. And it went from that to a sentence out of the judge in Durango. I think he has maybe 2 more years to serve. His goal was to get to a point where he could help his son, who is still in high school. And he said he's going to miss that. But he said he got a call from him. We put some money in his account so he could make a phone call. And he talked to his son, and his son says, Dad, you'd be happy. I found a girlfriend. And he said he immediately took the position of trying to take the story and saying, son, you're in high school. Don't get serious with anybody. And he said, Dad, you don't understand. This girl is the pastor's daughter of the church that I'm going to. And it's just been an unbelievable story of how it's worked out. I could go on and on about these stories, but remember what I started with. We got a long ways to go in a short time to get there. The other thing that we're doing, we started this Christmas. We're handing out a book and a hope pack, is what we're calling them, to every inmate and to all the deputies in the jail that want one at Christmas. In the years past, we've always had the Angel Tree program. As a chaplain and as volunteers, if you've ever been involved in it, it's extremely hard to administer. One year I remember going all the way to Montrose to deliver gifts to somebody. They had moved out of this area, and to get them there, they said the only way we'll take them is if you bring them up here. What Good News has done is orchestrated a small church, and I never have gotten the size of it, in Chicago, was helping a local prison there. And they said, one of the things we can do is we can put together a book. This last year was volume 4 of it. And it's an activity book. It has word searches. It has mental things. It has stuff all in here. But the gospel is presented about every 3rd or 4th page. I have some extra copies of these if anybody is interested in looking at it. But we handed these out this year along with a sack that had some semi-healthy stuff, Christmas treats, a Christmas card, a calendar, that type of thing. And it was amazing what happened with the number of requests. The kites that we got from the inmates, they skyrocketed. They were all of a sudden seeing generosity that they're not used to. Even in jail, if you have money, it's a different experience. You have commissary. Once or twice a week, they come by and what you've ordered, you get hand delivered to you. If you don't have any money, you just watch everybody else. But when we hand out the Hope Packs, it doesn't matter anything with money. We just hand them that gift. And it's been extremely successful. If you're interested, what we do is have a packing party where we go through and we actually get all the volunteers or anybody that's interested in doing that, put together those sacks, and then we have some of those volunteers with the discretion of the deputies at the jail allowed to come in the jail and hand those out. And it's a real neat program. That little church in Chicago, this past year they handed out 80,000 of these in the States. It went from that little local prison to something now that is nationwide through Good News. What I want to talk to you today, the sermon title is called The Strength of a Nation. And what I want to do is give you right up front, and it's in the bulletin also, is that we get a lot of books that are donated to the jail, to the library, stuff that we can hand out to the inmates. And I remember a couple of years ago getting this book from Paul W. Powell. He's deceased. He's been, I think, gone for about 10, 15 years. But his special sermons for special days. And have you ever been in a situation where you realize that sometimes when you see something, it's not easy to see all of it? I get to this 4th of July sermon, and I'm reading through it, and then all of a sudden 3 or 4 pages are missing. I thought, okay, you got my attention here, and now just through a printing process, it's down. It's an older book. It was hard to find, but I put an appeal out there. If anybody has one of these things online, please send it to me. I want to follow up on it. And a gentleman sent me one, and I've got the rest of the story. And I'm giving credit to Paul Powell because that's where a lot of this came from. I also use a David Jeremiah study Bible. And there's a lot of references in Paul's sermon here that go back to it. But then we're going to be sprinkling in here stuff through our ministry as well. The strength of a nation. This isn't rocket science. This isn't something that, if we're going to be a strong nation, it's pretty basic. As you can see the outline in the bulletin, it's something that's pretty straightforward. The key verse that we're going to go to is Proverbs 14:34. It's a simple verse, but it speaks directly to how God is going to bless a nation. Proverbs 14:34, it's on the screens here. This is a New King James translation. It says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to many people." The strength of a nation is going to be totally dependent upon the righteousness of that nation. I think we have time here today, and even if we don't, we'll make it. But let's start off, if we're talking about the strength of a nation, can we give Pledge of Allegiance to our nation right now? You'll see a flag on the screen here. So can we all stand up and do that Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We started every day of school doing that until all the way through high school. I don't know if we did it in high school, but I think we did. It was through the PA system. Yeah, Mr. Wesley Snipes, our principal, would get on and do it. This was originally written in 1885. It was Captain George Thatcher Balch, B-A-L-C-H, or Balch, I guess. He was a Union officer in the Civil War. In 1954, the One Nation Under God was added. That was initiated in Congress, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower commissioned it into law, that he signed off on it, and that was an addition. That was a change that was made that made a lot of sense. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, a famous orator and pastor, 1834 to 1892, has this quote, and I'm going to qualify some things here when we get through it. But he said, "I surely believe that England has been raised up as a nation and brought to her present unique position that she may be a means of spreading the gospel throughout the nations of the earth. I judge that God has blessed 2 great nations of the Anglo-Saxon race," and this is a point we're going to talk about in a little bit, England and the United States, and given them preeminence in commerce and liberty on purpose that in such a time as this they may spread abroad the glorious knowledge of God in the face of Jesus. if you go back, and it kind of always, when I first read this, it bothered me, this statement about the Anglo-Saxon race. That goes back to, even 1400s, 1500s, where the influence out of the Germany in England itself, they were referred to as Anglo-Saxon. England and the U.S. now is much greater than that, isn't it? We are a very diverse nation. It's not just the Anglo-Saxon race. I didn't feel comfortable just omitting that or not saying it, but that's the way you worded it. When you go back and look at this, there's a ton of information. His quote up here on the top says, avowed atheists are not a tenth of the danger of those preachers who scatter doubt and stab at faith. He's saying somebody that even says he's an atheist doesn't hurt people as much as somebody that's not really presenting the gospel. And let me start off by qualifying things, because we're going to be talking about a lot of good things about the history of our nation. But this next slide talks about some of the things that shows that we were far from perfect. And I listed these, and we could probably add a lot more on here. The first thing I put down here was slavery. It's the black eye that the states had that we went through, and we fought a civil war to get to it. There's a point here that I researched, and it put a little bit more perspective to me on it. But in 1787, this is of 11 years after the Declaration of Independence, after we declared our independence, 11 out of the 13 colonies voted against slavery. But the Constitution was written such that it had to be unanimous. So you had 2 colonies that were not in favor of it, and you can picture where those colonies were. But yet we as a nation were pretty united on it. And it's nice to see that we could see that even. And we were able to correct that wrong. I put on here wrongs to Native Americans. I was born and raised in northern New Mexico, and I really didn't know even some of the traverses that were handed to the Navajo Nation until I was a grown adult researching myself. A lot of times the classes I had more Navajos than we had Caucasians in the schools I went to. But yet I didn't know that story about the long walk that happened in 1864, where they were taken off the reservation and transported to Fort Sumter in the dead of winter. History doesn't really have how many were lost on that in the dead of winter, but it was quite a few. And then later on, they brought them back to the reservation. They returned in 1868. Kind of a side note to that, and I've got this confirmation from a number of Navajo friends, but that's where fried bread came from. The staples that the government were giving them to survive all that included the ingredients for fried bread, about all they had. And that's where they developed fried bread. I've told them, I said, thank you, I've gained about 4 or 5 pounds from your fried bread. In one setting probably. Abortion, what can we say about that? It's been neat to see here in the news that they're saying temporarily the abortion clinic in Durango is closed right now because they don't have the staff to run it. They say we're trying to get that, and it's a multiple state type thing where people are coming in and using that facility now. So we pray that maybe it'll continue, but right now that's shut down. And these last 2 things are greed and corruption. A lot of our wrongs are centered around those 2 things. The greed of people will cause all kinds of problems and issues. And I know that in my own life. If I quit thinking about myself and think about what God wants, it helps tremendously. Now let's turn the page here and think about some of the good things we've done as a nation. We're going to focus on a Japanese person in World War II. He was a Christian living in Japan, David Tusada. He was a Japanese Christian leader, and he spent 2 years in solitary confinement in a Japanese prison. His crime, it was his commitment to Christ. In his own words, he says, there may be many reasons why the Lord has blessed America, but from my standpoint, the reason for America's greatness is that her churches gave so much for missions work. Even before that war, it was American missionaries in Japan that led him to Christ. And he was willing to be incarcerated over that. It's one thing we see in the jail. Occasionally we get an inmate that is okay with solitary confinement. Some of them want that. They don't want to involved in all the politics of a cell block. But there's other ones, woo, it is a nightmare for them. It's just crazy. I mean, it's such a small confined area, and they use that as a punishment. But there's times that other inmates are saying, please put me back there. I do a lot better in that. And it's all depending upon space. During the American Revolution, Thomas Paine said, the cause of America is the cause of mankind. What he's saying there, if this fails in the U.S., it fails worldwide. We have done so much for other countries in the name of freedom and with the freedom that we have. Go back to, again, I want to reinforce this verse, but Proverbs 14:34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach of any people. And we can go through those terms. I think you guys know what righteousness and reproach means. Let's be a little bit more specific here, and we're going to, if I can, my fat fingers can turn a page. There's a poem, and this one took a lot of research because it was referenced in Paul's book, but he didn't reference really the, who wrote it or the specific stories behind this. But there was a writer, a minister. He wrote a lot of poems. He was born in 1860. I get different dates on Clarence E. Flynn and when he died, but I believe it was around 1940. But he wrote this statement, and it's summarized in the bulletin. He says, I know three things must always be to keep the nation strong and free. One is a hearthstone bright and dear, with busy, happy loved ones near. The second thing is a ready heart and hand to love and serve and keep the land. And one is a worn and beaten way to where the people go to pray. As long as these are kept alive, the nation and people can survive. God keep them always everywhere. That hearthstone is the home, the flag, and the place of prayer. Those are obvious things, aren't they? But we as a nation have stumbled mightily on protecting those in our generation, haven't we? That jail, when I have given the basis of this sermon to an inmate or in our Bible studies, they didn't have a lot of these things. They didn't have these things at all. This Clarence Flynn, this was referenced in a Dr. W.A. Criswell's sermon back in '89, and he gave him the credit for writing this. We're going to, if you summarize these things, our nation's strength is our families, our flag, and our faith. That's where it amounts to. The first thing that we're pointing out here is the hearthstone, the hearthstone. Put a TH on the end of that. What is it? What do you picture when you see that? A fireplace? That's the fireplace I picture when I read it the first time. I understood that wasn't heart, it was hearthstone. I picture a winter cabin setting, it's snowing outside, the family's in the house, you got a warm fire going. You can see a Norman Rockwell painting of that nature of that family. That hearthstone bright and dear with busy and happy loved ones and near. One of the strengths that we had is we were always in a position, and I say that because it's not that case for a lot of people, but Teresa could be home with the boys while I was doing the work and providing for the family with a job. That's not the case for everybody, but that constant home was always there for them, something they're very appreciative of now. The strength of a nation is found in the character of its people. The character is formed in the home. You just can't get around that, are you? What do you do if you're a single parent? You better be here in the church. You better be having, if you're a mother trying to raise those kids, you better be still having that male influence through family or through church family or whatever. It's extremely critical. I've given you these illustrations here, but the number of inmates without a father figure is off the charts. If homes are places to love and respect and discipline, the nation will reflect that. We're going to shift gears here to reinforce this. We're going to go to a little bit of one of the natural ancient wonders of the world, the Great Wall of China. How many of you have ever seen this? One church I went to, about every hand raised. It was an older church, North Animas in Durango, and I guess those people had traveled a lot. It's an interesting thing. Let us kind of go through some of this image of it is really good. It's a point where you see the towers on it, And I didn't realize until I really started researching this just how many towers were there. We're going to get into the specifics. But as I mentioned, it's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was constructed before Christ, at least the start of it, 221 BC. It's roughly 2,000 miles in length. You can see it from space. I remember that being pointed out even during the Apollo missions or the Gemini missions. Walls are typically 25 feet tall with 30-foot towers in places. I don't think it's constantly for that 2,000 miles, but places they have a tower every 200 to 300 yards. If you work in construction, do you know what effort went into this? We were in Dubrovnik on vacation, Croatia, and they've got a wall around that city, a pretty major city. And they were proud in the fact, and they said, the Romans built this. I said, time out. Romans didn't build it. I said, well, you're not even what I felt that guy was thinking was, I overheard this conversation. Slaves built it, the Romans supervised it, but the Romans didn't do anything without slaves. Usually they were Christian slaves. But anyway, but even that city, for a fortress, they had a wall around it. China was now safe from invaders, and I put a couple of question marks that. In the first few years, the wall was breached 3 times by the enemy. How did they do that? They bribed the gatekeepers. You may have 1 or 2 people in a position that they can allow passage, and they bribe them, they're right in. The strength of any nation is the character of its gatekeepers. Now, who are our gatekeepers? It's our homes, it's the parents, it's our schools, it's our government, it's our churches. Are we failing in a lot of those areas? Big time. We're being breached constantly in almost every one of those areas. And it's something that can be corrected, but it's there. The second point of that Clarence Flynn poem is a ready heart and hand to love and serve and keep the land. What is that saying? It says a lot. You have to have a willingness to step forward and to serve and to keep your nation on those lines. And I think we as Christians have been negligent on doing a lot of that. We take the passages or the admonition that, hey, a separation of church and state, and a lot of times we're not involved in anything politically because we shouldn't be, is the thought on it. It's encouraging to see a lot of that is changing right now. Ignacio's own Clark Craig is running for representative in the state house. I sure hope he gets there. We know him personally through the Viceta Church, and he's a man that can help a lot. I hope La Plata County is wise enough to see that. I know even members of your church are involved in the school system here, the school board. And if God is opening those doors for you, be brave enough to say, hey, that voice needs to be heard. And part of those gatekeepers is, even if it's just an occasional letter to the editor. I remember way back when we had the Pine River Times, something was said about abortion that was just, and the general gist was this, that the religious people are just trying to keep people, home and pregnant. And I finally had enough, and I wrote a letter to the editor, and it was responded, and I got a lot of responses on it. I remember getting advice from some people that I was trying to get some support from. They said, you're not going to do any good with this. I may have not, but at the same time, they painted a picture of Christians that weren't right at all. And I gave them an example of a family in our church that had just had a newborn. The brother was a counselor in Denver, and he said, hey, here's a lady that's ready to give up her pregnancy to abortion because she can't find somebody to take the baby. And they took that baby. With their permission, I gave that in the paper. I said, isn't this the obvious answer? We as a church and people need to find homes for these unwanted. And it's amazing that you're there. But take a step out. God will bless that if he's in it. There's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Nationalism, and I want to make sure that we're aware of this, it's a blind loyalty that says, my country, right or wrong. If it's red, white, and blue, I'm behind it. And that's not what I stand for, and I don't think it's what most of us are. Patriotism, on the other hand, is saying it's a love of one's soil, an appreciation for one's heritage, and a respect for one's leader. George Washington defined it, and what is he referred to as? The father of our nation. There's an image of him on his white, kneeling next to his white stallion, which is documented. That was his horse of choice during the war, and kneeling in prayer before battle. He was it was amazing. In all the conflicts he was in, even as a foot soldier, he was never wounded. I think I've told this story maybe even in this church. There was one time in a winter battle, they took off his cloak, and there was either 4 or 5 bullet holes in it, but he wasn't wounded. And that may be a shot through a sleeve, and there's 2 holes. It's still pretty amazing, isn't it? That's the hand of God. George Washington defined patriotism as the spirit of acting like a father to one's country. He respected his country. If you ever been to his estate in outside of, I guess, Virginia still, that's where he wanted to be. He had a plantation there, and he wanted to go back to that, but he saw the need of what was needed from his country. Abraham Lincoln spoke of the highest kind of patriotism when he said, "I am not bound to win, but I am bound to be true. I am not bound to succeed, but I am bound to live up to the light I have." We have the luxury of looking at history, knowing what the result was. Abraham Lincoln didn't know what was going to happen with the Civil War, yet his thought was, I have to do what's right. And this is what's biblically right. And if you know him, it ended up costing him his life when he was running for re-election, and before he could even start that second term, he was shot. But he did what was right, and that's all we can do. When I retired, one of the first things we did is I bought a fifth wheel camp trailer. We're going to see the world. I've earned the right. God had something else in store for me. It wasn't much longer that Randall had put out a notice that, hey, the jail needs a chaplain. They'd been without a chaplain for over a year then. By the time I went through the whole process of getting in, it was close to 2 years. I volunteered for about a year just to try to help with Randall and everybody else there. The third strength of the nation is found in our prayers. What are we doing here today? We're assembled here today with fellow believers for that edification that we need from each other. We need that strength. I need that resource. We need each other. We need a place of prayer. The Bible is very specific, and an inmate will call me, and I'll bring him in. They say, I need you to pray for me for the following. I said, one condition, I'm going to give you some prayers also. I want you praying on my behalf. I've got some needs out there. I've got a son and daughter-in-law in harm's way in Kyiv, Ukraine. I want you to be praying and giving them a purpose. But the Bible is very specific that when I pray for somebody else with no selfishness involved in else, the Bible, the way my interpretation is, that's elevated at a level that I don't fully understand, but God finds favor in us praying for other people. And this is a worn and beaten way to where the people go to pray. That's why we're here. Thomas Jefferson said, can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, the conviction in the minds of people that these liberties are the gift of God? There's an example here, and I know I'm pressed for time here, but July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia. It marked the birth of our nation. We declared our independence from England and our dependence on God. It's a good way to word it, isn't it? We don't want you, but we want Him. 11 years later, 1787, representatives met in Philadelphia to write the Constitution of the United States. They struggled for weeks and made very little progress. 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin rose and addressed the troubled and disagreeing convention. You know, I'm a student of history. I love to read it, and I wouldn't think of Benjamin Franklin saying what he said here, but this is all recorded. This is part of our nation's history. In the beginning of the contest with Britain, Benjamin wrote, when we were first sensible of danger, we had daily prayers in this room for divine protection. Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. Have we now forgot this powerful friend, referring to prayer? Or do we imagine we no longer need his assistance? With success, you tend to walk away with things, don't you? It's all about me again. He said, I have lived, sir, a long time, and the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of man. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, referring to the Bible, that except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that build it. Those representatives again earnestly prayed. Inspired by the Creator, the Constitution was written. God has blessed our nation because we sought his directions in its beginning. Don't take that to light, because there is a movement big time right now to forget about our history. The Constitution should be evolving and changed. The woke movement is all about that. And if you go to Washington, D.C., if you're a student of history, it's all about that. I'll die for those causes. That's where I think God would have us to be. Don't ignore what we're funded to. The last point here we want to preach out is the French government sent Alexis de Tocqueville, this is 1831, sent him to the States to study our penitentiaries. That's what caught my attention here, was the study on it. He became intrigued with the American way of life and studied it in detail, and he wrote this classic book, Democracy in America. It quickly turned from a study of the penitentiary just to the greatness of the U.S. In it, he said, I sought the greatness and the genius in America, her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and he saw it there. I sought of the greatness, and he said it wasn't there. It wasn't the complete picture. He saw amazing things, but it wasn't the complete picture. I sought for the greatness and genius in America and her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution, but it really wasn't there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. It's us. It's a body of believers. I know Randall well enough to know that the gospel is preached here. His word is lifted up above everything. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. God keep them always everywhere, the home, the flag, and the place of prayer. Thank you all for letting me be here today. I think we've got communion today. Brother Bo's coming down. Thank you, guys.